What I want to do in this video is present you with a bit of a contrastive analysis. I want to explore the difference between those people who have a flexible mind from those people who have a slightly more inflexible, rigid mind. Because if we were to ask pretty much anyone that we know, do you have an open mind or a closed mind? What would you say? There's a pretty good chance that on the other side of the screen from me, you're going to be saying, yes, I have an open mind. As would pretty much every human being around the world. But being open-minded or being closed-minded, open-minded is not like a destination, it's more of a journey. And the reason why I say this is because as human beings, we do not know what we do not know. We cannot see what we cannot see. And if you take only one note from this lecture, let it be this. A question to ask yourself every single morning from the moment you open your eyes. What don't I know that I might need to know today? And this just keeps us in a place of inquisitiveness and flexibility, because when this is our question, when we're looking for ways to expand our thinking, our understanding, to create new neurological pathways in our minds, we cannot afford to be closed or be opinionated about anything. Alrighty, so what I want to do here, I want to help you to learn experientially. So I want you to do a bit of an analysis on yourself here. We're going to explore what it means to have a flexible mind and see how many of these traits apply to you, are relevant to you, and then we're going to explore what it means to have an inflexible mind. And if it's real, if you can relate, at least own it, all right? This is how you will benefit most from this course. So flexibly minded people strive to maintain an open mind by asking that question that I've just framed. What don't I know that I need to know today? What can't I see? What don't I know? Is there any way that my current perspective or outlook on life might not be 100% accurate? Because a famous old philosopher called Plato once had an opinion about opinions. He suggested that opinion is nothing more than the medium, the bit in between wisdom and complete ignorance. So he didn't place too high a value on opinions, but what he did place a high value on was truth, insight, and understanding. Seek understanding before all things. And the only way that we seek understanding and grow in insight, grow in knowledge as human beings, is when we strive to maintain an open mind. We strive to maintain an open mind when we're open to new ideas and perspectives. Many people aren't. All right, there are many truths in society today around the world that some people will reject, they will dismiss because it doesn't fall in alignment with their perspective. And as we're most likely also aware, truth is very, very rarely convenient. I mean, think about it. If you were to go into your local shopping mall and you were to identify a grossly obese individual, and then you were to walk up to them and tell them the truth and say, "Excuse me, sir, madam, you are extremely obese," what sort of response do you think you would get? That's right, most likely not too a favourable one. And why is this? Because the truth has a bit of a tendency of being quite inconvenient and hurting. All right, lies and opinions and all sorts of whacked out perspectives are generally far easier for most human beings to swallow. But these ideas and opinions and mindsets rarely lead to personal growth. It is the truth and the truth alone that allows us to grow and expand in our thinking and expand our perspectives. What mature, wise people understand, flexibly minded people understand, is that there are truths out there beyond that which we have experienced and that have been proved by scientific method. And it's used to take a little bit of time out just to explore what science actually is. Because some people say that psychology isn't an empirical science. In fact, I would go as far as saying psychology couldn't possibly be an empirical science. Why is this? Because when we're dealing with human beings, either relationally, as a parent, as a leader, as an influencer, in whatever context, we're dealing with subjectivity all of the time. And subjectivity is just me looking at life from my perspective. Objectivity is when I'm looking at an event, an experience, a circumstance from a perspective that is not my own, objectively, through the lens of analysis to establish that which is true. Because there's a big difference, isn't there, between us thinking something's true, us feeling like something is true, from us believing that something is true, to something actually being true. Some people believe that aliens exist. Some people believe that they are unicorns. But the truth is sometimes a little bit different from those things. All right, so here's the thing. Flexibly minded people strive not to make harsh assumptions. Now, as NLP practitioners, this is really, really important because, as we're most likely aware, some people come out with the craziest, most whacked out beliefs, ideologies in life through their conversing. And here's the thing. If we are quick to judge, then we're going to be very, very slow to win trust. All right, and if you think about it, trust is kind of like the foundation upon which all relationships are built. If we want to build strong, robust, healthy, wholesome relationships in our life, we can only do so when trust is in place. And think about what is actually required in a relationship between anyone in order for trust to be established. The relationship is going to have to be free from assumption and judgment. In the same way that you don't like being assumed the worst of or judged, everyone else on the face of this planet is exactly the same, which means that if we are striving towards becoming flexibly minded, that must mean that we are striving not to make assumptions or judgments of people when they share with us their story. All right, there's a presupposition in NLP, and this is that everyone's doing the best with what they have. And when we're talking about what we have, we're talking about our articulate ability, the vocabulary that we have, because communication is the means through which we communicate and share our experience with other people. Closed-minded people will be very, very quick to judge and assume the worst, and that is generally what kills relationships in their tracks. And the quality of our relationships generally has a tendency to determine the quality of our lives in general, entirely. We're either listening to understand people, or we're listening to reply and say our piece. Flexibly minded people listen actively to understand people because the last thing they would want to do is compromise the trust in a relationship or be seen as an ignorant, assumptuous, judgmental fool. So, wise, flexibly minded people allow time to reflect upon new ideas that they don't immediately understand. Could you imagine what the world would look like today if every single person got this? All right, how many people do you know who emotionally react? Perhaps you've been in a conversation with them and you'll say something. Perhaps you've said something that you might not necessarily have meant to say. Then this other person gets really offended, gets really sensitive, gets upset or angry or gets sad, starts crying, something like this. Flexibly minded people take time to reflect upon new ideas that they don't immediately understand. Inflexibly minded people assume that the way in which they see things is how things are, without a shadow of a doubt. There's no other truth could possibly be possible apart from the one that I have just pictured inside of my mind. So, in order to get the most out of life, our relationships, our interactions with other people, through learning, it's important we let people finish speaking before we judge or arrive at a conclusion. For this is how we learn and grow to become more balanced human beings. Inflexibly minded people might take a little bit longer to develop than flexibly minded people, and here's why. Because inflexibly minded people generally have a tendency to assume that their perspective is the most important perspective in the world. The world revolves around me. There's many mental health disorders and conditions going about in the world today, and there's one that I would suggest hasn't yet entered into the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it's this: self-consumption-itis. This is where people view themselves as being centered to the world, right? Cannot see anyone else's perspective or viewpoint than their own, nor are they even interested in doing so. And this is what keeps people locked into their own ignorance and their own limited understanding Some people must be right all of the time. Am I speaking to anyone that you know? Some people are not interested in hearing anything that contradicts their opinions, their beliefs, their worldviews. As I've already mentioned, the truth has a tendency of being massively inconvenient sometimes, but it is the truth and the truth alone that sets us free from our patterns of limited thinking and believing and feeling. Many of the destructive patterns and cycles that keep people bound and enslaved to themselves for anything up to an entire lifetime. Inflexibly minded people will reject ideas that they simply dislike or that they disagree with. Anything that isn't comfortable, some people will take offence at. People will, say, I take offence at this truth you've just shared with me, therefore it is bad. And again, it keeps them bound to the limited notions that have got them the outcomes of the results that they're currently operating in. There's multiple ways that we can look at life. The schools of psychological thought are a fantastic example of this. Do you know what they are? You have the Freudian perspective. Freud looked at how it is that we develop unconsciously, consciously. This is called the Freudian approach, through which the psychoanalytical school of psychological thought developed. From that school of thought, we then had the schools of behaviorism, cognitive school of thought, we had the humanist school of thought, to the social psychology, and everything in between. And the reason why I share this, it's important to understand that every single independent school of psychological thought looks at the human experience from one perspective. And there's a big difference between perspective and focus, all right? You and I could both be looking at the human experience. This is what we're focusing on. But what differentiates me from you and you from I is our perspective, because our perspective is where we're looking from. So if we ever want to see something differently, all that we need to change is not what we're looking at, but our worldview, our stance, and the perspective that we're looking from. Make sense? You've come across an inflexibly minded person when they take offence, when people, things don't meet their expectations, as all things must appease them. Do you know anyone who lives their life like this? There was a wise old man called Albert Ellis. Now, he was the founding father of a discipline called rational emotive behavioural therapy, and this was quite prominent back in the 1960s. Albert Ellis came up with this list of quite humorous, unhelpful beliefs and ideologies that people subscribe to in life, and this was one of them. He said some people subscribe to this completely ridiculous notion that all things and all people must please me. If people and things do not please me, they are bad. All right. So as I've already mentioned, at some point we need to grow out of our childlike ways of thinking and into something more mature. And we do this through becoming more flexible and abstract in our thinking. Some people would rather prove other people to be wrong than have their own world views expanded. So I share all of this with you, but so what? I'm here asking. Well, you can do an honest evaluation of yourself, how open-minded you are. How open-minded you are will determine the quality and the caliber of your relationships for the rest of your life. And the quality and the caliber of your relationships will determine how much progress you make professionally, in work, socially, and all other areas of your life. All right? Period. So, I want to wrap this lecture up, this idea, just to really warm you up here, all right? And as you're probably gathering, I'm quite an animated teacher, right? Sorry, can't help myself. I get really passionate about this stuff because it's only been over the years as I've embraced these concepts and ideas within myself that I've made changes, grown and improved as a man, as a husband, as a friend, as a father-to-be, and so on and so forth. As I have left concrete authority behind and entered into abstract authority. And you're asking the question, Kane, what on earth are you talking about? Well, let me take a few moments to explain. It's quite a simple idea. Think about what it is that we're born into as babies. When we're born into a level of concrete authority. When we can't speak, we can't feed ourselves, and we can't change our own clothes, we are completely reliant on people more mature, wiser, with more experience than us, to take care of us. They are our authority. Our parents are our authority in life, until the day comes when we leave home. Now, granted, the age in which some people take responsibility for themselves is kind of extending a little bit. I know some men and women today who are still living with their parents at the age of 30, 35, 40. And it's important to note that maturity in life has less to do with age, how old we are, and more to do with our acceptance of responsibility for ourselves. And this ties into abstract authority, all right? If I was to ask you right now, who is the authority of your life? Well, this is going to be determined by who you perceive is or as being the authority in your life. If you still see your parents as being your authority, or your teachers being your authority, or the government being your authority, then from your perspective, that's who is the authority in your life. But as we grow more flexible in our thinking, in our outlook, then we become more abstract. Abstraction becomes our authority then. Some people have asked me over the years, Kane, upon whose authority do you teach? I'm a teacher of applied psychology. Neuro-linguistic programming is an expression of applied psychology. So when I come to respond to this, it's important that I help people understand that what I'm not doing here is reading off a script. I'm not regurgitating someone else's pre-created curriculum, because this is the foundations of philosophy. Knowledge builds upon knowledge, ideas build upon ideas. And it's only when people grow more abstract in their thinking that they will learn to then convey these ideas in new ways to meet new needs throughout society. And this is fundamentally what it means to be an NLP practitioner. Not an NLP regurgitator of notions or ideas, but when we build knowledge upon knowledge, we take someone else's knowledge, integrate that with our own experience to offer something greater. So concrete authority comes with rules and from other wiser or more mature people who know better than what we do. For now, for some people, as far as NLP is concerned, I'm going to be your concrete authority, if this is the first time you've ever explored or looked into NLP. But as the years evolve and as you put these principles into practice and grow in experience, abstraction becomes your authority. Why? Abstract authority comes as we hold ourselves to account in response to us fully owning every single aspect of our lives, our relationships, and our personal growth journey. Some people never reach the stage of maturity where they take full responsibility for their own life, for the outcomes they have in their relationships, their finances, and ultimately their own personal growth, because some people are forever waiting for someone or something to take responsibility for them. So what's the purpose of NLP, I hear you ask? Well, just to summarize these ideas, it's moving from here to here.